Understanding wild yeast starters. Wild yeast starters, also known as sourdough starters, use naturally occurring yeast and bacteria to leaven bread. Unlike commercial yeast, wild yeast ferments slowly, developing complex flavors and textures. A starter consists of just flour and water, capturing wild yeast from the environment to create a living culture that can be maintained indefinitely. Creating a wild yeast starter from scratch. To make a starter, mix equal parts flour and water in a clean jar and leave it at room temperature. Every 24 hours, discard half and feed it fresh flour and water. Within 5 to 7 days, the mixture becomes bubbly and sour smelling, indicating that wild yeast and beneficial bacteria have colonized the starter. The fermentation process. Wild yeast produces carbon dioxide, making bread rise, while lactic acid bacteria contribute a tangy flavor. The fermentation process is slower than commercial yeast, typically requiring 12 to 24 hours for the first rise. This slow fermentation enhances gluten development, leading to a chewy, open crumb structure. Choosing the right flour for starters. Using unbleached, organic flour helps cultivate a healthy starter. Whole wheat and rye flour promote faster fermentation due to their high mineral content. White flour can be used once the starter is established, but whole grain flours provide more nutrients for sustaining wild yeast. Hydration and dough consistency. Hydration levels determine the texture of artisanal bread. A 70 to 80% hydration dough, meaning water is 70 to 80% of flour weight, results in an open crumb and chewy texture. Higher hydration doughs require more skill to handle but yield airy, rustic loaves. Kneading and gluten development. Since wild yeast ferments slowly, gluten forms naturally over time. Instead of traditional kneading, many bakers use the stretch and fold method, gently pulling and folding the dough every 30 minutes during bulk fermentation. This technique strengthens gluten while preserving air pockets. Long, slow fermentation for better flavor. Cold fermentation in the fridge for 12 to 48 hours deepens the flavor of artisanal bread. The extended rise allows enzymes to break down starches into sugars, enhancing sweetness and creating a rich, complex taste. Slow fermentation also improves digestibility by reducing phytic acid in the flour. Shaping and proofing the dough. Once the dough has bulk fermented, shaping it correctly ensures a good rise and crust development. Using a banneton, proofing basket, helps support the dough's shape. The final proofing can take 4 to 6 hours at room temperature or overnight in the fridge for better flavor and structure. Baking with steam for a crispy crust. Baking in a preheated Dutch oven or adding steam to the oven keeps the crust soft during the initial stages, allowing the bread to expand fully. After the first 20 minutes, removing the lid or steam source enhances caramelization, creating a crispy, golden crust. Maintaining a healthy starter for future baking. To keep a wild yeast starter alive, regular feeding is essential. Stored in the fridge, it needs feeding once a week. At room temperature, it should be fed daily. A well-maintained starter lasts for years, producing endless batches of flavorful, homemade artisanal bread.